Here's the brutal truth about customer research. Most product managers and innovators think they know their customers, but they're building products for assumptions, not real people. In this discussion, we are detailing a recently completed Voice of the Customer project that's helping the longest existing professional association for, guess who? People like us, product managers and innovators. That's right, the VOC project was to better understand who the ideal customers of the professional association are and what their needs are. The association is one I've talked about before, PDMA. That's the Product Development and Management Association. Now, if you've ever struggled to get meaningful customer insights, felt overwhelmed by diverse customer segments, or wondered how to turn research findings into actual product changes, this episode is for you, and I think you're going to really find it valuable. Our guest is Kristyn Corrigan. She's a principal at Applied Marketing Science and also a PDMA Board of Directors member. She has 17 years of consulting experience, and she's helped companies transform customer insights into successful products many times over. She leads the Insights for Innovation practice, has published work in Fast Company, and guest lectured at MIT Sloan. Let's jump in and learn about Voice of the Customer research right after this.
How can you unlock your full potential as a product manager? We're sharing the product management insights you need. They are based on the 7 research-backed knowledge areas for product mastery. You'll learn to create products customers love, enhance your influence, and elevate your career. Welcome to Product Mastery Now, hosted by Dr. Chad McAllister, product management professor, practitioner, and your guide.
Kristyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chad. Excited to be here.
I'm excited as well to hear you are a repeat guest. We've talked before, and I really appreciate what your organization does, Applied Marketing Science, MS, to explore voice of the customer and pushing the boundaries on voice of the customer research. You are the group that formulated this originally many years ago by your founders, and it's an important area of customer research. And let's talk specifically about what you did for PDMA and jump into that. I'm glad to see PDMA in some sense eating their own dog food because they do curate and research the body of knowledge on customer research. But what came up? What was it that prompted PDMA to invest in voice of the customer research?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Chad. Back last year, I think it was actually a year ago this month, we had our annual in-person board meeting for PDMA. And I quickly noticed that one of the central themes that was coming up time and again in our meeting was this need to better understand our members and their needs, and also prospective members, that community that maybe doesn't know about all the great things that PDMA has to offer. The big questions that we sought to answer with this VOC were, what does it take for a professional association today to attract new members, to retain current members? How do you keep them engaged, coming back for more, and really talking to their peers and colleagues about what a great organization they've become a part of? So that was really the genesis of the VOC and what set us on this path.
Okay, very good. Yeah, over the years, PDMA has had tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of members, but I know retention has been an issue. I've been involved with them since 2007, and I'm just curious as we talk through this if I see myself in your research findings or not.
Yeah.
I'm aligned with them primarily because I've just found the knowledge they provide so useful, right? That's how I got attached with them in the first place, through a local chapter. And I found the meetings, the interactions with other product managers, like face-to-face, was so valuable. And then what they published to help me do a better job, I wasn't finding other places, right? So that was really key. Okay, so that's kind of a good background. Walk us through the research design. A lot of us probably don't actually know what a voice of the customer study kind of looks like. Give us an intro into what you did.
Sure. And Chad, I'll back up and start off by saying it has probably been over 20 years since PDMA has done formal VOC research. I believe the initial voice of customer research, on themselves, was done by my colleague, Jerry Katz, and another foundational pioneer in the field of voice of customer and really influential in PDMA in their earlier years. So it was long overdue for us to do this research. What we did first in terms of methodology and design is we did qualitative in-depth interviews. And the reason why we started with these in-depth interviews was to really understand in-depth the motivations, the needs, the pain points of members and prospective members of the organization, right? It's easy to assume that you know what customers want. We see this from organizations that we help all of the time. But having those in-depth conversations really do allow you to probe deeply and learn more about really what's driving them and what it is they want in their own words. So we started off with, I think it was 21 interviews. We kicked the interviews off at the 2024 PDMA conference down in St. Louis. We did a subset of conversations there with attendees, and we were really intentional not to inject bias into our sample, right? So we sought to have a mix of established members, so like you, Chad, people that have been involved in the organization for years and years, as well as people that maybe this was their first PDMA event and they didn't know much about the organization. And that's important because we want to get varying perspectives when we understand needs. We also included a mix of member types, and let me explain that. So PDMA, like you said, really prides itself on linking the academic community to the professional community. And so they think of their membership really in three buckets. You have academics or professors that are teaching and researching product development discipline. You have practitioners. So typically that's people that work internally in an organization and a product function, your product managers, VP of product innovation. And then you have your service providers like myself. So these are consultants that help organizations and help companies really to excel their product development processes one way or another. So our conversations were with all of those different segments.
And oddly, I always have trouble aligning myself because as my career has progressed, I fall into all three buckets, right? I started as the practitioner, never expected to go into academia, and I'm a professor of product innovation, and I help companies at times, right? So I do the consulting thing as well. So
Right.
I think I would be a mess to choose as someone to interview, frankly, because of that. But I got to understand the key segments there. We also mentioned before you were trying to identify and talk to present members and also people who could be potential members. How else did you think about segmentation for your audience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There were other considerations for the sample here as well. We wanted to make sure that we spoke to individuals at various stages of their career, right? Because there were some hypotheses about the needs of early career, particularly as it relates to certification, right? So we wanted to make sure that we understood those educational needs, those certification and training needs from early career, as well as mid-career and later stage career, to understand really in totality what those various levels need.
Okay, good. So it started at the conference. So you're talking to some of the attendees there and looking for people in those different groups, the academics, practitioners, and service folks, and then aware of the different stages of career as well. So obviously not everyone was at the conference that would fit what you were looking for, especially prospective members probably.
Right. Yeah. And that's always a challenge in the voice of customer research, right? Getting those non-customers or getting those people that are less connected to your product, to your organization, but absolutely necessary to make sure we don't have that biased sample, right? And that comprehensive set of needs and feedback. We really leaned into our network for this. We're a board of varied professionals across the product development industry. And we went out to LinkedIn and we found people in product development. And we asked them to participate in this research really to guide the future of the industry. And we got a fantastic response rate. The other thing that we did, you might find interesting. So PDMA is not the only product development and management organization, right? There's many others. There's Women in Product. There's also an organization called Mind the Product. And every year, Mind the Product has, I call it a festival or a conference of sorts. And we actually had a colleague go and attend Mind the Product and intercept people attending that event to talk about their needs and their thoughts about the future of the industry. So that was really great too. Get some voices outside of PDMA's typical ecosystem.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's probably one that people think of specifically in the product management space, right? Whereas
Yes.
PDMA, these words somewhat blur together for me, frankly, and I
Yeah.
don't always use them distinctly myself. But PDMA thinks of themselves as in product innovation. We're part of the audience. So if you're involved in creating a new product, which might be a service, might be a
Yeah.
process, something else. Um, but product management has evolved in the last decade and a half or so as the career path and discipline for people who are creating or improving products and organizations for customers.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so I didn't know about Buy the Product. I'm really fascinated about that. Want to get more details on what you learned, and I'm sure you'll be publishing more out about this too, that we can just talk about now. But take us through the specific methodology a little bit. So there was thoughts that put together about who we're going to interview, and then
Hmm.
there were these structured interviews that occur. And maybe you
Right.
can give us some details about what a structured interview looks like, and what I don't know if there were surveys involved later or other things you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Tell us about the methodology.
Yeah. I'm happy to talk about the methodology. So, for these qualitative discussions, we want them to be open ended, but we do need to make sure that the conversation is guided so that we cover all of the relevant areas of interest for PDMA. So, we create a discussion guide with open ended questions with probes so we're getting beyond the obvious. The irony and voice of the customer is actually the worst way to understand customer needs is to directly ask people what they want. Because when you do that, what people default to is a solution or a spec. So they default to the how versus the what, which is really what we're trying to dig deep and understand for voice of customer. So those probing questions, those open-ended questions, asking for stories, asking about some of the best events they've attended with professional organizations, or on the flip side, the worst experiences, really great ways to understand and uncover those detailed nuance.
Absolutely. I want to take you back to a point you shared there about not asking people what they want, but instead on stories. And just to emphasize that a little bit more. And you gave a couple really good examples, right? Taking people to actual experiences that they've had and asking them to share that, right? Like other customer research I've been involved in, it might be, well, tell me about the last time you had that problem, right? And how did that work out? What did you do? What else did you try, right?
Yeah.
And so in this case, the best events you've attended, maybe the worst events you've attended, to get them to talk about a real experience.
Right, exactly, Chad. And here's the thing, and this was relevant particularly for the members we were interviewing that have been involved in the organization for a long time. There might be a tendency for them to filter. And by that, I mean adjust what they're saying based on what they think I want to hear. So
Right.
by asking them for stories, for example, asking them about the last PDMA event they attended, you can overcome that tendency to filter because they're not thinking about what does Kristyn want to hear in this moment, but they're focused on the details of that story, that real experience, and it helps us to uncover more authentic insights.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway just from our discussion, right? To connect to actual experiences and explore those and what people did, what they felt, what's come out of that. Okay, so
That's right.
hopefully not going off on too much of a tangent here, right? So just recap, you did open-ended discussions using a interview guide, so we knew that where we were headed overall, and then focused on stories, actual experiences to get information back. Tell us more.
That's right. Yeah. And a key part of voice of customer is transcribing the verbatims, the actual words of your customers in these interviews, because capturing that detail in the moment while you're interviewing yourself is impossible. Anyone that has done VOC interviewing will attest to this. Even having a note taker there, you lose the authenticity, you lose your customer's voice. And Griffin and Hauser talk extensively about this in their academic research that you mentioned at the start of the podcast, really as the gold standard for VOC and getting that voice. So we transcribe the interviews. And now, traditionally, Chad, to extract those detailed customer needs, we would use human analysts to go through the Word document and physically highlight with the Microsoft comment function and phrase the benefits or the needs the customers are expressing. But in this instance, I'm excited to share that we utilized a fine-tuned AI specifically developed for VOC. And that was a
Which I just
fantastic
have to say,
experience, really. Yeah.
it's
Go
so
ahead.
exciting. And I did have the pleasure of talking to one of your colleagues back in episode 529. If anyone wants to go find that, it'll just be productmasterynow.com/529. Carmel Dimner is in conjunction with some research that were and probably still are doing with MIT, what they've been doing with AI. But as someone who has done more qualitative research than I want to admit, it is painful and time consuming, and your brain starts getting a little loopy at a point. You can only do so many hours of this at one time, looking through transcriptions and trying to pull out the needs or the themes you're looking for. Having an AI tool help you with that. Love that we're seeing progress in this area, and you guys are really leading a lot of that when it comes to VOC research.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned the tedious nature of qualitative analysis, because that's exactly what this fine-tuned LLM helps with. In short, it's been trained by dozens of past voice of customer studies that AMS has done. So it has learned like one of our analysts would learn, and it has been fine-tuned and given feedback just like a human analyst would. And so we really think of it as a complement in our VOC process. And we saw that here with the PDMA work. We were able to run all of the transcripts from the interviews that we had done for PDMA, which in this case was 21, through the large language model in a matter of hours. And we actually did a side-by-side comparison to what human readers were able to unearth from those same transcripts. And it was interesting, Chad. What we saw was there was actually a lot of overlap in the needs that the AI generated and in the needs that the humans generated. We did see, though, about 15% of needs that only the AI was able to uncover, and about 20% where only the human was able to uncover those needs. So interesting to take a look at those patterns there and think about how something like a fine-tuned AI can help us with a tedious task like highlighting transcripts.
Very good. Yeah, interesting though that even if we just say AI did this, and I'm delighted to hear you had human analysts also to check to see how our AI engine is doing with that.
Right.
But it got us to 80% of what was to be discovered. And speaking of what to be discovered, can you address the 21 interviews?
Yes.
You did mention this original paper, that this is really where AMS came from, Don Hauser and Dr. Abby Griffin, their original work on how do we understand customers' needs. And I remember from that, because this was enlightening to me, like, can you really do it with so few interviews? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of the number of customers you want to speak with in a given voice of the customer effort, Griffin and Hauser's research really points to around 30 interviews, hour-long interviews, getting you to 100% of the needs in a given category. Now, in this instance, we spoke with 21, which is slightly under 30. Their research also supports that doing 20 interviews gets you between 80 to 90% there in a given category. So really healthy, robust sample there. And I'll add that you know that you're there when you start hearing repetitive themes in your conversations. And that's exactly what happened in the PDMA research.
Yeah. And I know organizations that have changed strategy on 6 interviews because they're hearing the same key thing, like, okay, we have to run with that, do something here.
Yeah.
So other practitioners, we have awareness that you don't have to talk to a lot of people to get new insights that you're missing right now.
Right. It's all about asking the right questions, going deep on the areas that matter to the customers that you're interviewing. Additionally, for this research, we did have a quantitative phase after the qualitative interviews. And so we knew that after speaking with these 21 professionals, we would be going out to a larger sample of individuals with an online survey. So we would be able to validate our thinking in that way as well.
And what were you trying to validate there? What was the survey accomplishing?
The quantitative survey, what we set out to accomplish with that was to understand from members and prospective members of PDMA what are the most important needs to them? So, what's most critical when they're thinking about professional organizations generally? And also, how are market options performing on delivering those needs for them? So, how are market options performing on meeting those needs for them? And by understanding those two dimensions, we can create what's called an opportunity matrix to understand where to focus innovation efforts. So, inevitably, there will be needs that are highly important, but already well met by the market. So, in that instance, PDMA knows these are the things we must do today in order to survive as a professional organization. But there are also needs that are highly important and not well served by market options today. And those are the areas really to invest in for innovation and to ideate to try and create the professional organization of the future, which is what they want to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the golden information any product manager wants is what are my customers' unmet needs and which ones, if I address, are going to result in the highest value for them and hopefully in return the highest value for their organization. Okay, so quantitative phase to validate the findings and really have a deeper understanding if we're uncovering some opportunities in the marketplace to add value for customers that people that may be new members for PDMA.
Absolutely, Chad. And going back to the idea of AI powered VOC and how a fine tuned LLM can help this process, we see clients really gaining momentum with that form of analysis because it allows them to move to a quantitative prioritization survey like we're talking about now more quickly. So they can get that gold standard, as you say, that product managers want because they can do that robust qualitative analysis very quickly in a matter of days versus weeks.
Yeah. Okay. I am confident there are listeners that hear us talk about the quantitative data, and that's easy for them to lean into because they're in organizations where their product, if it's a computer system or other things, it's already generating data for them, right? And it's easy for them to find information. And at the same time, I know through conversations that some of these people feel intimidating talking to a customer. You've done this a lot. We already gave some tips just a little bit ago about lean into real experiences. Do you have any guidance about us that might be like, I don't talk to customers a lot. How would I even start this? Are there maybe some go-to questions that I can use to kind of work into this? Or even maybe mindsets about how we need to be thinking about our customer?
Yeah.
Help us out with that part.
Yeah, Chad, that's such a great question. Talking to customers and interviewing them for VOC can be really intimidating. I've trained hundreds of professionals on how to interview and how to do this effectively. And I will say that it takes practice. It takes practice. But first and foremost, it does require a mindset shift. It requires a mindset shift to listen. So it's a listening exercise. And when you change your mindset to that of one that is listening, and you tell your customer or prospective customer when you're setting up the interview, we're going to talk for an hour and I am going to listen and I am going to hear you, right? And you reassure them and say, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not looking for anything confidential or proprietary. In fact, if there are any questions you'd like to skip, you can go ahead and let me know that and we'll move forward. Right. So all of this is so critical because it puts them at ease and it really flips the script. And it can be surprising to some customers. They say, wait a minute, you want to spend an hour with me just hearing about my needs and my experiences and my pain points? And I find that alone really does help customers open up and it builds goodwill as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So set that stage. And just to emphasize what you were sharing about, we're there to listen to the customer. And I have encountered experiences, I don't have near the depth of experience that you have with this, but in being a part of interviews with people that we're trying to help initiate to this as well, where if I'm the owner of the product, I've invested in this thing, right? My background is engineering, and we use phrases like, this is my baby. This thing did not exist before I got involved and it came into the world, right? And we're attached to our baby, obviously. And I've encountered examples where we're trying to do the interview with the customer and we should be listening to what they're saying, and they say something and the product owner type person says, oh, you don't understand. Let me explain to you what your problem really is, right? Something like that. Can you help encourage us even more to just listen and not be defensive?
Yes, listening and not being defensive is critical. And it's really hard to do, as you say, because we're attached to our ideas. We are incented based on the success ultimately of the products that we manage or the divisions that we're in charge of, right? But shifting that mindset to one of listening, right? Like I said before, and also not one of defensiveness or correction. And that's so important. Even if the customer says something that you know is not right, that is the customer's perception and that is their truth. And correcting them could change the course of the conversation, and that they could shut down and not want to share candid feedback with you. So you want to keep an open mind. You really do. And that's so important. Sometimes with teams, I recommend, if you're the primary point of contact for the customer, if you're the salesperson, for example, that's managing the relationship, maybe you're actually not the best person to do the interview. Maybe you should have an unbiased person that is in another department or works alongside you conduct the interview, so that the temptation to do that is even further removed.
Yeah. And I found that works really well. I think it depends on, I think this is usually more appropriate for a B2B type context where the customer has a tight relationship with their account manager, right? Their sales professional. But in one organization that I worked in that was that setting, they would ask the product management type person to join them on a call, or we would ask sales to get us invited. And it was a different meeting. And I struggled, frankly, a little bit. Should the salesperson even be in the room or not? But they usually were. But we always prefaced it, and it came out of their mouth, which helped. And then I would reinforce it if I'm the one in the room. That this is not a sales meeting. This is a problem exploration. We brought said product manager. We brought Chad along to understand your problems more deeply, because that gives us a different perspective. Because we really want to help you in the future. And if we understand your problems now, we can do a better job in the future for that. And then I would reiterate, like, I'm really glad this person's here to hear what, more about your problems, but we're not here to sell anything at all. And to have that kind of exploration discussion instead about what the problems are that we're not addressing.
That's great.
Okay, so this mindset is really helpful. What about questions to kind of get us started if we're wanting to gain some confidence? What are some good questions to start with?
Good questions to start with in a VOC interview. I start easy. And by that, I mean questions that my customer is going to not have any issues answering. One of my favorite things, if I'm interviewing a professional, I'll ask them about their current role, how long they've been in that role. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And that gets them used to the process. It gets them used to talking. It helps them to open up. The next thing I like to do is start broad, right? As a VOC interviewer, I want to know what's top of mind from customers in terms of pain points or even delighters before I bias them with any more specific questions or probes around my area of interest. And what that does is it removes that filter, it removes that bias, and lets the customer guide the discussion and tell you where they have needs or where they have pain points.
Okay. So if I'm the customer, what's a question you might ask me to kind of keep that top of mind openness?
Yeah. Let's see. There's a few ways that you can go about keeping that top of mind openness. Sometimes we ask, thinking about your current role, what are the things that are really keeping you up at night? What comes to mind? And that focuses their brain on the things that are really burning right now to them. Yeah, that's a good one. Another way that we've done this is to ask about the product of interest or the category of interest and just try to understand what came to mind when we scheduled the interview? What are some of the topics that they're hoping that we'll discuss? Again, that way you're making sure that the tone of the interview is customer-led and they feel heard. Of course, keeping in mind your objectives and all the areas that you may want to cover in your discussion guide.
I love that's anchored in what actually happened, right? Like when you heard this was going to happen, what came up for you that you were hoping we might talk about? So,
right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, that's very helpful, I think. So we start with the easy question that is obvious for them to answer, it gets them comfortable, go broad, big problems, keeping them up, maybe at the same time, things that they are delighted about too, they found value in. And then where do you go next?
Yeah, and then where we go next, usually the customer will mention something that's in my discussion guide already, right? A problem that's keeping them up at night. So if we go to the PDMA example, one of the things that came up repeatedly in our discussion was this idea of networking and meaningful connections at events. And so people wanted to make sure that when they were attending an event for a professional organization, that they were able to make connections that helped them advance their own careers in their own learning in a way that could be applied immediately. And so in that instance, if somebody brought up networking as something they were looking for or something they thought we would discuss in terms of professional organizations, then I would go and understand more about what, in this instance, good networking looks like to that individual and seek stories. Tell me about a networking event that you went to that worked well. Tell me about a time that you had to network, maybe that you were uncomfortable or you didn't feel that it was worthwhile and what made it that way. So it's really getting more specific and more deep, first based on those areas that your customer is bringing up to you, and then based on maybe specific areas where the organization really want to get more insight.
Okay, and again, anchoring back to an actual event that happened that they have experience with that will be easy for them to talk about. Because one thing that happens, this was actually one of the elements of my PhD research, when we ask people questions that they don't have experience with, they're going to give us an answer still, even if it's kind of a made up answer, because us as humans, we don't like to look like we don't know things, right? So we do want to be thoughtful about asking questions that the person has a base of knowledge and experience to answer from.
Exactly. You're exactly right, Chad, because the last thing we want is people making up answers or providing us with information that isn't detailed enough, right, for innovation. We want those true experiences because that's really where the needs arise. One of the interesting findings in PDMA through the qualitative research was this theme of community and connection. And one of the things that individuals mentioned to me in these discussions specifically about PDMA, this was from some of the newer event attendees, so the non-members or not members yet, is that candidly, they felt a bit of an outsider at their first event because there were so many individuals that had been involved in the events for years and years and with the organization. And one of the specific things they mentioned, and that was more than one person that mentioned this, was the sheer number of acronyms at the event that they had to really digest and understand. So just for the listeners here, PDMA has a fantastic certification in product development called the NPDP, the New Product Development Professional. And it's a mouthful and a bit intimidating for individuals to absorb. And additionally, they have a publication called JPIM or JPIM. They have an award, OCI, the Outstanding Corporate Innovator. And this was eye-opening to me as I'm on the board of directors. I found myself saying, of course they don't know what these acronyms mean. We all know what they mean, but of course these new individuals don't know what they mean. And that was really eye-opening because it really revealed to us we were talking to each other and some of the communications about our events and even at the event itself. And we needed to take a step back and do a bit of a better job talking to these newcomers and defining the things that we all think are commonplace that maybe aren't to those newer to the organization. Yeah.
Right. That's a good insight to take away. And then PDMA has to figure out what to do about that, right?
Right.
How to act on that. So, okay.
Right.
Speaking of findings, was there anything else that bubbled up that you thought was really significant that you can share now?
Yeah, Chad, I'm happy to talk about some of the early findings from this VOC. Really exciting. We had our in-person board meeting actually at the beginning of May where we revealed these voice of customer results. And these results really ended up being the cornerstone of our board discussions. And I was so glad to see the usefulness of these data and how the organization is intent on activating that data. And here's what we found. So going into the voice of customer, PDMA had a hypothesis that perhaps the area most ripe for innovation was in our certification offering, right? So that NPDP certification. And what was revealed in the quantitative prioritization research is actually certification, yes, is a very important need of product development professionals. However, that need for certification is already well met by current market offerings. So we would call it a minimum requirement. It's something that PDMA must do today, and it's great that they're doing it. But really, the opportunities for innovation lie in forming meaningful connections and gaining the knowledge I need to advance in my career and to perform better in my position and in my field, right? So the findings really centered around personalized knowledge, applicable knowledge, as well as that connection. Those are the things that both members and non-members are looking for in a professional organization. And the VOC enables the board to focus thinking about those things first versus the minimum requirements of the market in this case.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll try to keep this really brief because I know we're also tight on time here. So I got associated with PDMA because I wanted to find people doing product management work, and there was a local chapter in Denver, Colorado, and so I went to that and got more involved with leadership, and we were all curious. Everyone was new to leadership at that point for the chapter, and PDMA talked about their body of knowledge, kind of a outdated term, but that's what we call it nonetheless. These 7 knowledge areas you need to know. And that forms the basis of what you have to know to pass the exam to become new product development professional certified. And we went, okay, well, let's all do that so we at least know what they're talking about. But it was that local chapter where that was meeting others. And there's still people I keep up with, a couple, nearly 2 decades later now, right?
Right.
And an interesting thing happened. You mentioned Mind the Product, which I smiled at before when you said that, because Mind the Product did a really good job of creating local groups in the U.S. and also in the U.K. And that frankly dissolved the Denver chapter at the time because there were other opportunities. And at that point in time, there was a financial commitment that had to be made as well if you wanted to come to the PDMA chapter, and that wasn't true for the other one. And we just kind of got pulled apart. I miss that, frankly, right? And I have struggled myself at times going, maybe I should help restart a chapter. But we need those in-person connections, and that once a month it's kind of an outlet to go talk to someone that you're not working with about the struggles you're having in your profession and get help. So
that's right,
we'll talk more about that,
Chad.
I suspect, soon.
Yeah, that's right. And since 2020, so many things have moved virtual, right? So many people have tailored back their attendance of these in-person events. And this research really shined a light on that gap and that need that people have to connect and to form community. And that really being the thing that makes it worth professionals' time to learn and stick with and become involved in a professional association like PDMA. And I'll add to that when we look at the customer needs that we uncovered in our qualitative conversations, and we look at the needs specifically uncovered by the fine-tuned LLM, so the AI-powered VOC, we see some very nuanced needs related to this idea of community specifically that were identified only by the large language model. So it's fascinating to look at detailed needs like able to break down barriers and pave the way for others like me, like women in leadership roles and product, or able to network with various types of organizations, including for-profit and nonprofit organizations, able to join an association that values my career goals and really tailors content to what I need. Again, just bringing it all together with what we were able to understand from the AI and understanding the priority of those needs was really powerful and continues to be really powerful on the strategy of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And clearly there's an AI opportunity here as well, because I think the organization that provides the tools that help you with the just-in-time information, just-in-time training is going to be very useful. And whoever does a good job of that first will probably get more attention. So I know we're coming up on I think a hard stop for you. How are you on time? Hard stop still in place,
we
right?
We can go a couple more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've just had a great time talking about these things and really enjoyed the conversation. Real quick sponsor message. We're talking about Voice of the Customer Research, which is customer research at its heart. And this is one of 7 areas that PDMA does promote as if you want to be a professional product manager, product innovator, you need this foundational knowledge. And I have a system that makes it easy for people to learn that information. It's called the RPM, the Rapid Product Mastery, speaking of acronyms, the Rapid Product Mastery Experience. You can learn it individually or as a team. This is perfect. If you're a product VP and you want to do some care and feeding of your product managers and really supercharge their work, we will do it together with them, and it will be a great experience for them. Find out more at productmasterynow.com. Kristyn, we do love innovation quotes. You brought one for us. Can you tell us what it is and what it means to you?
Oh, yes. I can give you my quote, Chad. I love that you do this, by the way. My quote is from Abby Griffin. Abby, fantastic. Have you had her on the podcast before, Chad?
Yeah, not, thankfully. Maybe. She's hard to get to do such things, and I was delighted that she came and talked about some recent research she was a part of.
Abby is fantastic and a foundational academic in the field of voice of customer. And her quote that I have today is, "It takes as much time to solve a bad problem as it does a good problem. And if you're not working on good problems, you're really wasting your time." I love this quote because it really speaks to the value of voice of customer, right? We know as product managers, as innovators, we can't focus on everything, but we want to make sure we're focusing on the things that matter and having that deep understanding of our customers' needs in a systematic way and understanding how they trade those needs off and what's most important and where there's opportunity for increased performance really does guide us and help us to solve those problems worth solving. So that's my quote.
I love it. Yeah, we need to focus on things that are worth doing. So we have to find out what those things are. Customer research helps us get there. Fantastic. We mentioned your organization a little bit. Tell us how people can find out about resources you have available, the work you're doing, anything else you wish to share.
Yes. If you want to learn more about my organization, Applied Marketing Science, you can visit our website at ams-insights.com. I'd also love to connect on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to continue the conversation. Look forward to hearing from you.
Fantastic. And there are resources out there on ams-insights.com as well to learn more about this. I will include those links. I'll also include links to the previous interview with Carmel about what you guys are doing with AI, and also a fantastic interview a few years ago Jerry Katz did. You mentioned him along the way as one of the early people involved at AMS, where he laid out the 4 steps to a voice of the customer interview that was just so clear and concise and just really valuable. So those will be in the show notes for this as well. Kristyn, thank you so much for joining us and taking time to talk about the research you've been doing.
Thank you so much for having me, Chad. This was fun.
And listeners, if you do want to find the written article of everything we discussed, including those links, simply go to productmasterynow.com. /545. As always, keep innovating.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.